Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, everyone. This is the final session in this series with Bill and Joel exploring just introductory insights into regenerative design and development. So happy that you've joined us both today and many of you previously. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off quickly to Bill and Joel to take it away. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah. All right. Welcome, everybody. So we are going to take some of the principles that we've been working on. We've been reviewing 7 principles over the last 3 sessions. And now, what does it mean to apply this thinking to your work? And by work, we mean the larger system that we work within, including your project, but beyond that. The principles that we reviewed the last 3 sessions are work with whole systems, work with potential, not problems. You can read the ones in the gray, but we're not really covering those tonight, although all of them are related. And then what does it mean to understand potential from the uniqueness, what the unique quality of each place that we're building? We'll unpack this a little with a couple of examples tonight, because whole systems is a concept that we don't typically work in our culture. We reduce everything to smaller pieces. So we're working with larger systems, and those larger systems are living systems. So they always have potential. They always evolve instead of just individual problems. And to get our head around that, I'm going to have Joel introduce a bit of an exercise. Joel?
There we go. We're going to have you go into breakout groups. We're going to put you in groups of 3 or 4 and just get you to think about the difference between working from goals or potential. And one of the things you could think about is we've just passed the new year. A lot of people have New Year's resolutions, and you might have a resolution that's a goal, but look and see if there's actually potential you're trying to realize that's behind that goal, right? So we're going to ask you to use a concrete example so we can see the difference between goals that are sourced from potential and those that are just kind of generic. So think about how this difference, the different in the effect of applying that to a child, a relationship, a community, or an ecosystem. So as Bill was talking about, the larger system it's a part of, instead of just say weight loss, what is the potential in your health that you're trying to realize in that relationship to your family or those around you? Thanks for coming back. And I'm curious, if you look at how you had to think differently to think about goals versus potential, what was the difference in how you had to think about it? What did you have to think about when you were thinking of working from potential instead of just generic goals?
But we're still getting people back, Joel. You might want to repeat the question.
Sure. So again, the question is, so as people straggle in, we asked you to think about the difference between generic goals and goals that come from some kind of view of potential. And my question is, so if you think about your thinking, what did you have to think about? What did you have to look at? What did you have to ask yourself to distinguish between generic goals and ones that were based in some kind of potential? What perspective did you need to take? How did you need to look at the question?
I'd be happy to add that, I just think of a goal as kind of a standard or generic place, but a potential looks at the individual possibility for each person. As a teacher for many years, you see each student as unique, and what they're able to do really can vary from person to person. And so you might actually go much, much farther without a goal if you're looking at the potential.
Good. So you have to look at context, and you also have to look deeper within. Is part of what I'm hearing. Great.
Well, I like to say, I'm Taryn, that definitely we were looking at the goal and potential within a system. But I thought of why couldn't we reverse and say, what's the difference between looking at potential and a goal? And the reason being is that because we're looking through the lens of a system that, we automatically equated as being a objective instead of being subjective, and we never have anything in between. And so I just said that for me, the infusion of, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice helps you to contextualize and look at potential in a different way. And even, as far as moving the goals forward. So if we change the goals, if we looked at the potential first, and then out of the potential, we have a goal, but we start just really leveling and thinking about the potential, and in particular, the human potential.
Awesome. So it has to be maybe objective and subjective, or you want to start from that potential and instead of imposing goals. It's part of what I heard.
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I'd love to hear from one more person. What did you have to think? How did you have to look at this question? We got a chat, so I'll just read that. I also had to try not to be too intimidated by the idea of potential. Potential is much more open-ended, less limited. It can change over time as you discover more about your topic, so it's also more flexible. All right. Any other thoughts about how you had to think about this differently, or maybe even what surprised you when you thought about potential versus goals, or in light of goals?
Well, with goals, I think of, it has a start and an end, whereas potential is ongoing, right? Because it's self-development or, continuing to seek growth, whatever the case may be. But I'm looking at the two. That's how I would see a difference there. Goals, you start, you reach that goal, done. Well, potential could be, ongoing or without limit based on what you're addressing, I think.
Awesome. So you get to the goal line, you accomplish that, you move on to the next goal or something, right? Mm-hmm. And as we know, life and living systems don't work that way. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a violence when we focus on those goals instead of look at developing potential. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Super.
Bill, we ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Yep.
So this last exercise is really critical for understanding regenerative development. And so what is it? We're going to go back to this definition many of you have seen multiple times, but I think it's worth unpacking it a bit. And then we're going to share some examples. So regenerative development. And by development, we aren't talking about buildings, we're talking about evolutionary or movement or childhood, human development, the idea that we can keep improving and changing our relationships with ourselves and with each other and with the systems we're part of. So developing the capacity of human and non-human living systems to realize their innate potential. And that concept of innate potential, based on the discussion we just had, I'm curious if anybody has, if anybody can illustrate what innate potential might mean to you. Any thoughts on that?
Innate potential.
I think that innate potential is the abilities that you have within you that have been hidden or unreachable until you become aware that they exist.
Makes sense to me.
Nice.
And so we are talking about living systems, looking at that living line, human and non-human. By non-human, we mean anything else that's alive. We're working with the idea of potential is always operative in living systems, in an ecosystem, in a water system, a riparian corridor, a community, a forest. And so there's always this potential to engage the larger context that it's part of in a continually rebirthing or renewing way. And regenerative development means we are intentionally responding and working with that potential. We're paying attention to it in a new way. So how does this actually work when we're talking about building projects? And that's what we're going to be sharing with some examples right now. Joel, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think let's go to the next, and we'll do it through example.
All right.
So some of you may have gotten a reading after last session that I wrote about stone soup, the children's story. And when we were doing this session, we were looking for case studies. And I thought, well, that stone soup one is good. And so I think this is a story that shows up all over the world in different forms. And it illustrates all of these 7 principles over on the left-hand side. And so you may or may not know it. Some strangers, often 3, show up in a village. Sometimes they're soldiers returning from war. Sometimes they're monks. Sometimes they're just wanderers. Sometimes it's one wanderer. And they're cold and they're hungry and they're wet and they want a nice place to sleep and a nice meal. And no one will open their doors to them. So they begin to boil a pot of water with some stones in it. And somebody comes out and says, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're making stone soup." And they think, well, stones are easy to come by. I would love to know how to make soup out of stone. So they bring them a bigger pot and they introduce this idea of stone soup. And it'd be really good if we had a little bit of salt, pepper, maybe some onions. And pretty soon the whole village is drawn by their curiosity and begins to imagine for themselves what not just the soup, but the village feasting together could be like, and also what each of them has to contribute. People start to bring carrots and potatoes and noodles and dumplings, and eventually there's this beautiful pot of soup and tables and chairs, candles and conversation and song and dance, and eventually late in the night, the villagers invite the strangers into their homes to sleep. And the travelers, the wanderers, they don't tell the people, oh, we could all get together and if we pool our resources, we could have a wonderful time. They plant that image in people's minds. And by planting it in their minds, people begin to feed it themselves. So it's this kind of pull process instead of a push process. They're not being exhorted to share. They're not being exhorted to get beyond their fear. They're not being exhorted to contribute. There's this collective vision that they each kind of individually create for themselves, and they see a role for themselves within it, right? So by creating this idea of a potential, instead of working on the problems, oh, everybody's so mean and greedy and scared of one another, they don't go there. They start with the potential, and they're working with the whole system of the village. And they're also aware that that village is within a larger system they've been traveling through that's been torn by war or famine or plague or what have you. And they begin to build a collaborative field. They begin to get people to work together, to think together and contribute together, each what they have to contribute. And the whole idea of Stone Soup is a nodal intervention, right? They're not trying to create a whole change in the village wholesale. They're introducing an idea. It's just a tiny little nodal change. And what's really interesting is that each village is going to create different stone soup. It's going to be based upon the unique potential of that place that day. And hopefully that they'll continue to develop in this way long after those visitors are gone. That by realizing some level of potential, they'll be intrigued enough to keep that going. And just one more thought that wanted to get you to think about, if you began to think of your work, we're usually responsible for making things happen. What if our work changed from us being responsible for the brilliant ideas and making things happen, producing designs, producing projects, to what if we began to look for and plant these nodal interventions, these visions in people's minds so that they created it instead of us creating it? And that's one of the things about being a regenerative practitioner. It's about how do we no longer be responsible for the product, but be responsible for developing people's capability to deliver better and better products, better and better projects. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted, in slide 5, we made a mistake here. That's work with nested systems. And so picking up on what Joel was saying, the next nested system out is how do we inspire this larger community and stakeholders to engage with their own motivation based on the potential they see. And this is how we begin to make massive change, not just project, but not just building by building, but each building or any task or opportunity or business can be a nodal intervention to work with the stakeholders in a new way to expand the effect in the world. That's how we actually, in our premise, how we can actually really amplify the work that's going on here by inspiring people to look at potential rather than commanding people to just do goals only. By the way, goals are important, but the goals emerge out of the potential. Okay, Joel, anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Okay, so now to share with you a project that illustrates these potentials. This is a large sustainability resort that was developed in the early 2000s in Baja, California, on the Sea of Cortez. And we all know the Baja is a desert, right? Looking at the upper right-hand picture. But in fact, this land had all sorts of potential that had been hidden. It was originally significant estuaries, which are the seed beds for the health of the Sea of Cortez, where fish and shrimp breed. But through improper farming practices, European farming practices, can't find my cursor, the estuaries were buried in sand, further encroachment by bad development patterns got rid of it. If you look at the lower right-hand side, I don't know why this is doing this. Hold on for a second. Anyway, the lower right-hand side, you can see that the development was over a gigantic estuary that had been buried. So there was potential here to actually reestablish this estuarine relationship with the Sea of Cortez. So the potential was regenerating the health of the Sea of Cortez, because in fact, if the Sea of Cortez was not healthy, nothing would be successful in this area. The fishing industry would go away, the tourism industry would go away. There was no reason for people to have second homes here, which is really what this development was for. And the story that we were able to develop was that this development could actually resurrect, if you will, rebirth the estuary, which is what you see here. A small picture of the larger development that actually circles back around and connects with the Sea of Cortez to the south. So that every home on the edge of the estuary was actually responsible, and people paid extra money to do this, to actually maintain and to propagate and then maintain the red, sweet, white, and black mangroves. So people, when they bought here, they actually bought for two reasons. One, they wanted a second home, but the architect of this place, Irie Cunliffe, let me move that ahead here, who's the fellow in the long white hair there in the upper left, was so inspired by this vision that the real estate crew, when they flew plane loads of people down here, they trotted Irie out, and he explained to them that we had the potential to heal the Sea of Cortez and live in a way that the ecosystem wants us to live, to help us support the health of this system. 90% of the people that purchased there bought for that reason. They also wanted a second home, but they were so inspired by that vision that the sales were basically dependent on that story. And 2008 happened, and I think many of you remember what happened then. There went massive bankruptcy, and this resort went bankrupt. And it actually went through two other developers that also went bankrupt over the next 3 years. But look, in 2011, on the right-hand side, the place is actually being built out. And what was really cool is that the Homeowners Association, I will read this quote here. Loretto Bay Resort emerged from the economic downturn, and what emerged, thanks in part to social media, was one of the most well-organized, powerful homeowner organizations in the world. And what this homeowner organization was doing was holding the potential of this place to engage the Sea of Cortez in this healthy way. So this potential and effect of the larger whole system lived on and was carried forward by this homeowners group without any impetus from a developer. And this is an article in Forbes in 2013, Loretto, Mexico being one of its most sustainable urban destinations, came out as a result of actually building that potential into the system. So reviewing these principles again, is that the whole system was not just the development, it was the Baja Peninsula, that watershed of the Baja Peninsula and the Sea of Cortez. The potential of it was to be in relationship with each other, to actually have that estuary begin to source and provide much more beneficial habitat for the fish, etc. The capability of the community was built over that period, those 3 or 4 year period, where they were actually knowing what they had to, learning what they had to do. And they were collaborating in this homeowners association. They were working not again with just the system, but the larger nested system of the Sea of Cortez and the Baja Peninsula. And the Nodal Intervention was in fact the idea of being an estuary, which was unique to that place. That wouldn't have worked if we were working in the Sonoran Desert, for instance. So paying attention to what was unique there and what was important is what actually created the motivation of the people living there. Okay, Joel.
Yeah, I just want to point out that it was because the homeowners in that first couple of rounds of homes that were sold were so taken by this idea of their home being the source of regeneration for the whole Sea of Cortez. And they developed the capability to tell that story and see how the development could work in that way, that's what ensured that that work on the regeneration of the city of Cortez continued throughout changes in management and even continues through to this day. So that work is still going on regardless of who the developer was. And that's why back in this definition of what regenerative development is, there's this whole thing about developing capability so that we can see this vision, create this collaborative field to make it happen, and work on it together and keep it going long after whoever started the project is gone. Right? So that's one of those pieces of regeneration. It doesn't have an endpoint like a goal. It's continuing to develop and realize the potential of the place. And the project is playing a role within that, right? And an essential piece of that is to develop the capacity and capability of the people in that place to work on that. And that happened both in the stone soup example, right? That they created the stone soup. Nobody taught them how to make the stone soup. Just like in this example, although Irie and ourselves came up with this vision, they developed the capability and capacity to continue to live that out.
And regenerate it. And this is really important. Regeneration just doesn't happen once. It's a regenerate and then regenerate, because the thinking people move in and out. It has to be rebirth, let's say every year, just to pick an arbitrary number. Okay. So that's the point of today's work session. And now we said that we're going to work on what does it mean to apply it to our work. And we began a discussion last time, I think it was with Bob, on, I don't know if he's here tonight, on a real situation that he found himself in, and some other people suggested that they had situations too. So we wanted to actually pull back and stop talking at you, and to actually see if you have an example of something you've worked on or are working on that we might imagine with you through a regenerative lens, to think about how we can shift our work towards this particular way of being in the world. So is anybody interested in exploring one of your projects with us, with everybody present, just to go deeper into what this might look like?
I will.
Great.
I'm not going to tell you everything, but I am in Bushwad. I'm a native of Oakland, California, and I live in Bushwad. I've been here for 20 years, and I have a community development project. I am living and breathing and experiencing gentrification. Well, I just was accepted into this Resilient Hub training, the first of its kind, where I am thinking of how to lean into gentrification and use our Bushwad Park and Recreation Center as our hub. It also has a garden, and it has baseball fields where people, it's like the only last open space here in Oakland, and it's highly utilized now. So I'm thinking of, you know, how do we, and I'll bring this variable up. I'm the community development block grant chair, and I'm over federal funds for low income households in my district. Well, where I live, it used to be low income, but now it's not. So I have adjacent communities like one block over that the Bushwad Recreation Center services. And then I also have public housing in the neighborhood as well. So we have some old people who have lived here forever, who own their homes. And then we also have, it's like really mixed. And then we have new families coming in. And then we also have another variable where Kaiser Elementary School, which is a school in the hills, has closed. And now they're going to be housed, once all of the public schools are open, in the elementary school here at Bushwad. So you've got a lot of dynamics going on, but it's really a beautiful place because it's a park, it's a lot of sustainability. You've got families, you've got a lot of great things happening, and we don't have enough resiliency hubs in the city of Oakland. So this is the first training where that will be the center where people can go in power outages like we've had, or when it's, you know, when it's highly polluted and you can't go outside, and it will act as a service center as well. So I'm just beginning to start thinking about that. So that's my project.
Okay, so the question is how does this, is it one resiliency center or many?
It's one. It's the Bushwad Recreation Center.
Okay, so the question
and it is, I'm thinking, as a resilient hub.
So, you know, one of the ways to think about this is part of this is trying to solve all kind of problems, right? There's nowhere for people to go during power outages when the air can't be breathed, you know, all those various things. But there's underlying that there's a potential within the community that is really trying to be realized. So could you state what that potential is?
Well, of course, what I didn't say, of course, I'm in housing, so I'm interested in ADUs and using my actual home as that model. But the potential, you know, increasing housing, because we do have UC Berkeley students here. We have, it's sort of you know, we've got a couple of streets that are all residential, and then you have the development of many homes that are going towards ADUs in our neighborhood to, you know, increase the housing stock. Of community residents who are very interested in coming together to, you know, to form community. That's it. That's the potential, is that we have a community and people want community, because people are all, there's a lot of new people here, a lot of new families, students, people who are working every day, that are very, and that's the attraction of the community, the walkability, the bicycling, the stores. So that community is definitely there, but how do you get people outside of their homes to come to the recreation center, feel safe, because we still have those elements that are still here. And then you have the pandemic. So the potential is definitely here. The other neighborhood is here. So I would say that that's the potential. And the people are here who are compassionate and willing and wanting to do the work.
Joel, you have a thought? You want me to?
Well, just you said a couple of things, right? Is that the community is there, but it's not really able to express itself in the ways that you all want it to express itself, where people are talking to each other and learning from each other and taking care of each other. And if people have a problem, other people can help step in. And right, there's a kind of lack of connection that would enable that community to be much more resilient, right? Supporting itself, instead of looking always to the outside or having to commute or whatever it is to have a viable life together. Right.
Yes.
And so one of the things that you have done is you've played that movie in your head, and you can see how this center can help enable that. Right? And you could go out and sort of, you know, proclaim that to people. But I guess the question is, how would you help them begin to see that vision of that stone soup of the community, so they see how important this hub is, so they make it happen instead of you trying to push the rock uphill?
You're muted, Taryn.
Creating the story, a regenerative development story.
Okay, so the story of what? Can you name what you would be storying?
The story, well, for me, the story of culture, the story of this community, the story of you know, Bushwad, the Oakland Raiders, they used to practice here. The story of, for me, you know, African Americans coming and forming a tennis club and having all kinds of social events. The story and the current story is that Steph Curry and Alicia Foundation came and they have remodeled the community center and community lab and also the gym. The story that, you know, this used to be a creek and we're all, you know, housing, and the story of Idora Park. And how, I mean, and that's really the attraction. But like he said, there's the connection of that story. It's just been floating around. It's an attraction, but the connection in the story and the people within the community, we haven't made that connection to feel like a community.
It sounds like you just answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
And that's, you know, because, so can you say more about that instead of me telling you what I'm thinking?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, more about the story?
No. How would you go about making those connections?
I think
Build that motivation.
I have so many different connections because, you know, I'm interested in eco districts. I'm interested in, you know, ADUs. So bringing these kinds of concepts around the story of this community will build community. You have a story, and then you have, no, okay, we got to start with potential. We have the people, we have the community.
Yeah, so let me put, so here's what I'm hearing in what you're just saying. So you got eco districts and you have ADUs, and those are fragments, right, of the whole story. And there's nothing wrong with them, but they become goals. I'm going to build so many ADUs or whatever, and that's a great thing. They're all in service of creating a community. And so what's the potential of this community that people could actually see in front of them that would build that motivation to collaborate more, right?
Yes, exactly.
Or how do you see something like an ADU being a nodal intervention? So instead of creating a goal around it, even this whole idea of a nodal intervention, people could come together to build one together, right? People could pool their money to build one, and then they could, you know, it could be a revolving loan fund. It could be job training, right? So instead of just a thing, you're looking at those connections you're talking about to the larger systems and what capacities you're trying to build, right? Because the community is lacking in capacities to earn money, to develop capital, to come together, to grow and use the human capital that exists, you know, right?
Yes.
By the way, this is an aside, Taryn. I would love to actually have a conversation with you because there's some really interesting work about how to finance, self-finance these kind of communities.
Oh, okay.
And so happy to talk on that sometime.
I love that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So
Okay.
I would love it if we could talk to somebody else. Thank you, Taryn. That was great. And I want everybody to notice something is she answered her own question, right? It's that we just kind of asked her some questions and she realized she already knew the answer, right?
Does anybody else have a straw dog here to play with?
Or any reflections on that dialogue we just had? What did you learn about shifting the way you usually practice what you do and to be more like those guys making stone soup? How would that change the practice of engineering, architecture, real estate, education?
your practice.
Yeah, whatever it is you do.
Well, I would say, I was not familiar with the Bushwad neighborhood, and I just looked it up on the internet here. It seems to be a neighborhood with a lot of potential because of the history there, the park location, and sometimes, you can't see what's right in front of you, and maybe calling it out to the neighbors and the residents there and finding the common interests to say what does community mean for us here. And I think with that park, that potential there for the kids is one way to call support to the community, right? Because we all are concerned about our children and how we can provide potential for them. Just as one thought that crosses my mind.
Thanks.
Thanks.
What you said something that reminded me, Nancy, that it's one of my favorite quotes from Dwight Eisenhower. He said, "When you have trouble solving a problem, enlarge it."
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes our scope is so narrow, we don't see how those connections may be limited in that narrow scope. But in the broader scope, you can see all sorts of systemic relationships going on that we can tap into. So don't go against our culture, which is kind of reduce everything, expand it to the point of common sense management. Yes, tonight.
I lived 3 houses from Bushwad for 10 years. And I don't think I'm alone that there was a desire for community, because there's this beautiful community center, beautiful park. The school is lovely. It was so mixed culture that it was very challenging and there was gentrification, and so it was challenging to come together even as neighbors in some regards. So, but it seems to me, but I don't think I was alone in that. I wanted, I think there's a lot of desire there. I can bring up a project I'm not working on, but it's a vision that I have.
Okay. Vision away.
This is, so I live in a community that is, the land is owned by the city, and it's older. It's an older community, and there's a lot of land here and possibility for a community garden, possibility for even a small orchard, and yet they're older people. So, so my vision is, how, and some people do have food insecurity that live here. So my vision is around being able to develop that land with a garden, with orchards, that would both help the broader community and perhaps youth in the broader community to learn agricultural, and also to help the people that live here and to bring us together.
Good.
And if I had the time, the time, I would I would love to do it, but I don't right now, so, or the time and the money. But I have that vision. So
my reaction to that is you may not need money, and
okay.
you may not need a whole lot of time if you find others that are actually as motivated as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Combine that motive. So this is the building this on the potential that people see can actually create energy. It's what we find in our projects. It's just because if you scratch the surface, people actually want this stuff. They just don't know how to go about doing it. And
I'm in that camp.
Well, and our government structures, right, are all reactive in general, right? We'll solve problems, and it's political short timers who are solving immediate issues that actually get them reelected, as opposed to looking at the larger systemic issues. It's up to us as citizens and community members to look at the larger systemic issues, because our government doesn't know how to do that really. And we find that people long for it, no matter where we are.
So you said a really interesting thing, which is you didn't think you were the only one who wanted that in that neighborhood. And it's, you know, one of our colleagues, Ben Haggard, he often says, when he has a thought and he's in a meeting, he waits for someone else to say it, because he's assuming that if he had it, someone else had it as well. So what you're really looking for is, that's the stone soup idea, right? How do you begin to get people to connect in ways so they can, oh yeah, of course we should be growing food on that land to address food insecurity. And of course we should be doing that to teach science to the kids. And of course, right? And that, so the little nodal intervention is what gets those connections and that conversation to happen, right? And particularly where we're having to deal with one another electronically, that becomes an increasing challenge. But if there was ever a creative challenge, that's it. Is not so that we have the most brilliant design idea, but how do we have the most brilliant creative idea of how to get people to have that stone soup conversation, to have that community exchange in a time of separation. And boy, if we ever needed that, we need it now.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that is the question, is what is that intervention? Because to think that the people that live in this community who are older are actually going to be able to sustain a garden and an orchard, that I just don't imagine it, because they are older. So it's like, it's not just, I could get people excited perhaps here, but then there has to be an outside, it has to be broader than just us.
Yeah, what about partnering with people who are looking for activities or to gain that kind of knowledge?
Right, exactly.
You know, a youth organization of some kind, or someone who wants to learn those skills.
Going back to it, the idea of division, and I remember the story, this kid's story, that there was this man that was standing on the street looking up, and you know, he was staring up at the sky, and there was nothing apparently in the sky, but people would stop and ask him, "What are you looking at?" So that exercise of, you know, creating a vision, like, oh, I'm looking at whatever. In the same sense, if you could, for example, invite a farmer that you know, or your farmer's market or something, somebody to put a vegetable booth just one time, one day. That's all it takes for people to conceptualize the opportunity is there, the potential is there for that exchange, the food market or the vegetable orchard or whatever. So by sharing that vision with people that live there, there's like, oh, it's not so hard. We can just have a vegetable garden, a vegetable food market, and then the inertia or the friction breaks, and then without your time or intervention, the thing just carries on its own.
Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you, Miguel, for sharing, and Jennifer for jumping in. That was lovely. Tanaya for your vision, Taryn for speaking up, Jeremy for being active in the chat, and everybody for joining us. It's 5 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and let you know if there's something you heard in this that you want to catch again or you want to share it. We'll have a recording of this session up on our website for you to watch tomorrow. We also have the recordings of the other 3 sessions. If, like Brett, this was your first time and you want to go back and watch them again, also website. This is the last session in this series, but we're hoping to put together a couple of additional series that will start to go a little bit deeper and kind of like we sort of begin to whet your appetite with at the end of this session, beginning to talk about challenges or projects or things that you're actually working on and trying to be a little bit more applied. So please look out for those sessions as we get them organized later in the year. If you're not getting our newsletter, that's a great place to just stay informed of the things that we're doing. We'd love to see all of you again. In the meantime, if you have any questions about things you heard here, feedback you have for us, other things you'd love to learn that you think Build It Green would be great, a great partner with or can help with, please feel free to reach out. hello@builditgreen.org. Or you can call us on the phone. Our number's online, or we can give that to you if you prefer. So thank you so much, Bill and Joel, for hosting us through these sessions, and thank all of you for joining us. We really enjoyed having them and couldn't have done it without you being here. So thank you.
And a reminder, we have been sending out readings and exercises, and we'll get some out to you early next week.
And they're also going to be on the website if you have a lot of emails and they're hard to sort through. So feel free to go on the website there. Thanks again. And with that, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, the rest of your week, and have a great 2021.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.